My name is Scott Newman. I'm the chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee, and we have called a press conference this morning regarding a report that has just been recently completed with Driver and Vehicle Services. And I want to say that a few years ago, we had called on Mr. King and his team to help us out on something I actually hate to even mention, the MNLARS situation. And as a direct result of their input, we were able to resolve the MNLARS problem. And last year, Chairman Hornstein and I discussed, Chairman Hornstein from the House, we discussed the problems, the sort of ongoing questions that were unresolved regarding driver and vehicle services, specifically the new MnDrive system that had been put in place. And so we once again called on Mr. King to see if he would help us with an independent expert review of some of the questions that we had. And Mr. King agreed, and we had put in our legislation last year calling for this report to be done in January, and of course it is now completed. And Mr. King and his team, Amy Albus, Jenny Hine, and Teresa Weiss, were very involved in this also. Ms. Weiss is here with us this morning. The other two are appearing on live internet. This is being streamed live out of the Senate. So I just wanted to mention that I really think that the people of the state of Minnesota owe Mr. King and his team a real debt of gratitude. These are some very highly competent people who have now come to our aid twice with respect to issues that were pretty difficult for us to handle. And so now we have a report where there is some specific recommendations that the legislature and the Department of Public Safety can take a look at and try and improve the services for the people in the state of Minnesota. I personally think this report and the recommendations in it for DPS and the legislature are of particular importance to the people in the state of Minnesota who need driver's licenses and need their license plates and their license tabs. So it's really going to affect directly an awful lot of people. We have invited the Commissioner of Department of Public Safety, Commissioner Harrington, to appear. I've asked Chair Hornstein to appear. He is unable to make it, but Representative Elkins, immediately to my left, is here appearing on behalf of Chair Hornstein. We've got Rick King and his team member Teresa Weiss with us. Vice Chair, or I should say Minority Lead in the Senate, Senator Dibble, is invited. It's my understanding he will not be here. And we have also the Vice Chair in the Senate, Senator Josinski, is here, as well as the Vice Chair in the House Transportation Committee, Representative Petersburg. Minority Lead, I'm sorry. So those are the folks that are assembled behind us. Again, I think this is an important report for the people in the state of Minnesota, and I think it's equally important to have Mr. King tell you about it as to how they went about coming to the conclusions and the recommendations that they have made to the Department of Public Safety. Mr. King.
Thank you, Senator and representatives and Senator. Appreciate the nice introduction. Members of the press, hoping to give you a few points and then open it up for any kind of questions that you have for us. I think if you've had a chance to read through the report, you'll see that one of the things that we focus on quite a bit is the customer. And in this case, the customer is the citizen, the resident of Minnesota. Customer focus comes through in almost every page of the report. So when we looked at various recommendations, we weren't taking it from the point of view of the department. We weren't taking it from the point of view of the legislature, anywhere else other than the customer. Now, we did talk extensively to all of the other stakeholders, and I want to start out with a little bit about that so you have an idea. We had over 20 meetings with various entities, deputy registrars, some of them in person, some of them by Zoom or Teams, with the Auto Dealers Association. And by the way, the deputy registrars have two associations, so we met with both of those individually and some collectively as well. We met extensively with the Department of Vehicle Services, or the Division of Vehicle Services, and were able to meet with each of their departments in depth about the types of things they were doing. We also met with Fast Enterprises, who's the software provider underneath MnDrive, and also with the Office of Legislative Auditor, who has from time to time issued reports, including one that I'll refer to a little bit later on exam stations, which was issued in March of 2021. To help us with not only the field work, if you want to call it that, we also did, before the field work began, a 50-state survey. I think we got 36 responses from states. We asked them about the way they do the type of work that we were talking about, which is licensing drivers and registering vehicles. So we got a lot of good feedback from the states as well. And I want to clarify one point that might be asked. Deputy registrars, some of them are actual what you call DLAs, or driver's license agents. Some of them are not. Officially, the driver's license agents are the ones that do the licensing. In our report, we referred to them both as deputy registrars. So a couple themes that I'll highlight. First, the MnDrive software that was put in over a year ago now, and had a release also in last October that dealt with trucking industry's prorate of taxation and so forth, has been working quite well. I think it's been working as designed. It was a good decision by, I think, the government here in the state, by the legislature, and by the governor to move to that product. It continues to evolve and get better and to be configured for the unique needs of the states without doing customization. So we're very happy to see that. The prorate release seemed to go pretty well. That's highly specialized but very important. The registration for those types of vehicles is in February. So there's a lot of good data coming in as people are registering prior to that deadline. I will comment on the second point of theme is that this ecosystem, registration, licensing, and all the people that serve the state doing that on behalf of the customer, people are exhausted from all of the different things that have gone on. When you think about the pre-MNLARS software, the MNLARS software, and then the COVID-19 pandemic, all of these things have contributed to a lot of hard work by a tremendous number of people. It is absolutely incredible, actually, that I think the product was released in November of 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. So released on time, at budget, and so forth. And I think that's a marvelous achievement. Third theme I would say is that we found in looking at our state and other states that the deputy registrar model is one of the best models for our state at this particular time. Now that model is under a bit of stress, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but we had to think about whether that was the right way to proceed forward, and we believe it is. And we have a large number of dedicated deputy registrars working really hard on behalf of the state and the customers out there to serve them. And when we visited them, we could see illustrations of that. I would say, and I'll come back to more of this later, that financially, almost all of them are under some stress, whether they're public or whether they're private. They have some financial stress that's due to the increasing number of transactions that are moving online, where then they do not take the typical fee. And if you think about that for a minute, the types of things that move online are the types of things that are the simplest transactions, not the hardest ones. So then people end up in the deputy registrar offices to handle the harder fees, or the harder transactions. So it's more work for the same fee. The final thing I would comment on is that customers are looking for more and more self-service options and way to do things in an efficient way. That doesn't mean that they don't want to walk into their local office and get it done. They want to do it efficiently in the office, and that requires information when things are open, making calls, making sure they can determine that they have the right material with them to get their driver's license and so forth. And we have some recommendations in the report about that kind of information. But I think people more and more are comfortable with and will demand the online type of self-service that we're seeing come along here. In addition to the challenging environment that I talked about in the previous software in the pandemic, you throw on top of this the implementation of Real ID, which is not brand new, but for people going in to get their first Real ID or their first enhanced driver's license, the identity proof requirements are a high hurdle. You have to carefully read the instructions, carefully bring in the right documents. Hopefully you load them into the pre-op process and they get looked at before you ever go to the deputy registrar location. But oftentimes the deputy registrar will look at that type of documentation and find that it's not up to snuff what's required by the federal government standards. And as such, that became another hurdle because people came into the office looking to get the Real ID because they wanted to use it for travel or visiting federal facilities and had to leave and come back again. And then during the pandemic, more of the deputy registrar community was doing things by appointment, so then you wait for appointments. So that just snowballs itself, makes it difficult. The landscape that we talked about here is going to require some more self-service, but it also requires us to look at some things like removing unnecessary activity or eliminating things that we really don't need to do. And we have made some recommendations in the report about that. I'll highlight those in a moment. All in all, I think what the customers want in this state is to improve the quality and the speed of service in the whole ecosystem, get the right kind of information publicly available and be able to rely on it, know when people are open or not open for different activities, and then for us to measure the capabilities and the performance, and that would be a goal of DVS. Now, some of the recommendations are simply things that we believe DVS can implement, or in fact, some other agencies might be able to implement, and some of them will require legislative changes. So I'm really happy with the kind of collaboration we've had with both bodies of the legislature, very enthusiastic about having them look at these really in depth and put them forward so that we can move the process and hopefully have some of these implemented at the end of this session, as many as possible. So with that, I'm going to just highlight a couple for you, and then I'll open it up for your questions. We've recommended a fee increase for driver's license issuance in all cases, but particularly a larger fee increase, and this is a filing fee increase for the deputy registrar. We've recommended that around the enhanced ID and the Real ID because of the documentation requirements. We've also recommended a fee increase for any kind of renewal and the standard one, but those are on a different scale. Our thinking there is many of the deputy registrar offices have begun declining to do any of the driver's license activities because of the type of questions they've received and the number of repeat visits where they don't get fees. So we believe that increasing that is also commensurate with the kind of work and activity that we would expect them to do. Now, we've also made a novel recommendation, and this is to work with the vast number or the increasing number of online vehicle renewals transactions. Our recommendation, I should start back and say, today, a filing fee for the deputy registrar goes from the customer into one of the accounts that is then up to the legislature to do an appropriation for. So then DVS must fulfill that by sending the tabs or the plates or whatever by mail. So there's some fulfillment cost, that comes by mail. We're suggesting that somewhere between 25 and 50% of that filing fee that goes into that dedicated account be returned to the deputy registrar, because they end up being the question answerer about a lot of those types of transactions. Now, in addition to that straight recommendation, we've added that we would like it to happen when that deputy registrar is what we call a full service deputy registrar. So we're trying to provide an incentive to the deputy registrars to do both vehicle registration and driver's license registration. Full service would mean both of those things versus just picking one or the other. So with the increase in the driver's license fee and the sharing of the online vehicle registration money, we hope that we're incenting people to be a full service deputy registrar, and for more people to pick up doing the driver's licenses again. One of the main objections that we've heard is around the cost of the space, the cameras, and the eye exam machines, and the Department of Vehicle Services has committed to one camera, one exam, eye exam machine per DLA, per deputy registrar, paid for by the state. So we know that the initial return to doing the DLA work, the driver's license work, or initially doing that work will be helped along by the state there. In terms of thinking about taking work out of the system, we've made some recommendations that deal with the exam retakes. We saw the number of driver's license exams and the retakes where we had people that take the exam 8, 9, 10 times, which seems extraordinary. We'd like to figure out a way to get that to be reduced. We don't see that that should be over 2 or 3 times. If you can imagine people trying to fight to get appointments, to get in, to get their exam taken, it's just extraordinary that people would have to take it that many times. There's lots of ways we can work on that. And one of those would have to do with the pass rate. So monitoring the pass rate, working with the places that need working, and making sure the right information is available will certainly help. Also in the removing work area, and this came out of our 50-state survey, we're suggesting that the state of Minnesota eliminate the testing of transfers from other states coming in who are 21 years and older. So today, if you transfer from another state, you move from another state into Minnesota, you have to take the written test. We actually, with the drivers 21 and over, did not see a strong case for that, and we're recommending that that be dropped. Again, when you're looking at how do you preserve valuable slots for exams, here's a way. You take out some of the work. One of the larger areas, I think, of impact that we've recommended is to change the length of time that the Class D license is valid. Today it's 4 years in Minnesota. Minnesota is in a small number of states that still use 4 years as their validity time. There are some states that use 6, and I see an increasing number that use 8 years. There are many considerations for that, but we believe that if you didn't have to go and get your license once but 8 years, that you're also taking some work out of the system. We didn't deal with whether the fee should be twice as much because the license is twice as long or any of that, but just saying that you have the opportunity there. Often we hear from people that they prefer having an up-to-date photo, and I only want to comment that the passport photos are good for 10 years before you have to have a new photo. So there is some logic to all of this. A couple other points I'll make, and then we'll get to the questions. We did find in some of our work with particularly the public deputies that they were doing DNR transactions for boats, ATVs, snowmobile registration. And they had a separate system running that with a separate printer, both of those things sort of aging out of their useful life. And we recommended in one of the recommendations that DVS work with DNR to look at the software that DVS is using right now that actually has the capability within it to be licensed to actually do that kind of work with the same software, basically with an add-on piece at the deputy registrar. So that would reduce the number of systems the state has, as well as replacing the obsolete system. I think there's some pretty good uptake from that with DNR. We also, I'll close off on this, said that with the online sharing, that it's not only the deputy registrars we want to share the online fee with, but we want to share it back with DVS. If you recall, my point was that the money goes into a fund, and it is not reallocated to DVS based on transactions. It is basically allocated to DVS based on their biannual budget. So it's really hard to figure out how much postage is going to be and so forth and so on. So we're suggesting that that same 25 to 50% of that filing fee that comes from online vehicle transactions go into that account and then be dispersed by transaction on like a quarterly basis to DVS, and that will make a lot of the budgeting process, I think, a little simpler. There's 35 or 31 recommendations in total. They cover a lot of things that I'm not going to go into unless any of you have questions around that. But the team of Teresa Wise, who's here with me, Amy Albus, and Jenny Hine, we don't work for the state. We did this because we want the system to work well for the citizens of the state. We're happy to do it. We had a lot of fun doing it. We had full cooperation from all of the entities that I mentioned before. And our hope in the end is that the two chairs of the transportation committees will take it up and implement as much of it as they see in their wisdom is appropriate. So we're very happy with that. And I appreciate all of you being here today and all of you. So thank you. I'll yield or stand for questions.
If you don't mind, unless I missed it, will you touch on the number of driver's license exam stations, how you came to that sort of 40 to 50 range? And could some of the lawmakers comment on whether they think that that's a good idea? I know that you just reopened all of them and were worried about long driving distances. So I was hoping folks from both parties could comment, as well as Mr. King.
And Mr. King, if you'd repeat the question so the folks online know what the question is.
Will do. The question, thank you, Walker, and I should have mentioned that one and I didn't, so I'm glad you caught that. The question was, can I say more about the exam station recommendation in the report, and then to ask the legislators to have some comment about it as well. We were asked, in addition to the fee structure and so forth, to make comments about the number of exam stations. So as a basis for that, we dug through recommendations that were already made. We found a memo from MMB. We saw the exam station really exhaustive report by OLA, as I said, in March of 21. The OLA did not produce a number in that report. MMB, in an earlier report, used a number around 30. When we did a mapping of where the locations are today, assuming they're all open, where they were and where they are, I think they're almost all open by now, and we looked at what the laws are that, and the requirements are, and we map the counties and where these are located and what the travel distances are, and there's a lot of that in the OLA report, we could easily see that the number 40 to 50 would cover all of the locations. So we came down on the side of that, realizing that 92 is a larger number, and I think that's the target that is currently being fulfilled. But I do think the state can be covered well with less than that, and that's the range we have. We have a range because there are different things that I think the decision makers will decide, and they can, if they're within that range, we think they can cover. I will say this, there's no issue with the statute that calls for where one has to be and near another county and those kinds of things. The driving distance, while in some cases is not short by any means, but it's not terribly long, I think is okay. The requirement in law that someone be able to get an appointment in 14 days is problematic, in my opinion. And when we looked at that, it doesn't really matter whether you have 92 open, frankly, or not. If you have a whole lot of people, particularly in the summer, 14 days is not going to be realistic. That's when a lot of the kids are out of school and they're wanting to get the license. I think in other parts of the year, it may be very well. But that's the only law that we saw there that probably is at risk, and it's at risk at the peak times almost no matter what. So I think we're in pretty good shape. I think the other things that we suggested with exam stations, because it's so highly interactive with the public, we have some comments about trying to have better security involved with that, because people are out there and sometimes in cars with folks, and we want to make sure that both parties, the customer and the examiners, are safely taken care of. So that's where we are on the number.
From the legislation standpoint, at least as far as the Senate is concerned, as to your question, the number of exam stations to me is not nearly as important as to make sure that the exam stations that we have are open, staffed, and available to folks so that when they want to take their tests, they know when they get there they will be taken care of. This would be an area that it would be my intention to speak to Chair Hornstein about, and I think that when we ultimately look at this report and begin putting together bills regarding the legislative recommendations, I have a hunch that Chair Hornstein and I will be able to come to an accommodation. Ms. Weiss, did you want to make any comments, or are you just here to answer questions?
Here to answer questions.
Very good, very good. There's a couple of other legislators that would like to speak, and I will call on them in no particular order, but I think first I'll have Vice Chair of the Senate, Senator Josinski. I know he wants to talk to you folks particularly about DR fees.
Thank you, Senator Newman. Senator Josinski from Faribault, Oton, and Waseca. Thanks to Rick King and his team. This is a great report. Lots of things in here I like to see. Some of the sharing on the online fees I think are very, very important for our deputy registers, and really a special thanks to our deputy registers. They've been going through lots of things in their offices between staffing shortages, software that didn't work, training on new software, all the things that are frustrating. COVID-19, there's just so many things going on with all the changes, and they've done a remarkable job given what they have, and I'm excited about the software. But these deputy registers are doing way more input than they did before. And that's why I believe we have to look at these fees. You know, before they were doing less input and it was doing more done at DVS and DPS. Now our deputy registers, our frontline workers, are doing more of the input. So we need to make sure these fees do that. They cannot raise their fees as a private business could do if they're having more staffing time. And a lot of the time, they're trying to do something online and they get stuck online and come into the office and get to finish the transaction at the office. And either sometimes the transaction doesn't get paid at the local deputy register. So this is a great study to look at. Still a few concerns, obviously. The report is very, very good, but we'll have to look at some of the things that we want to make sure we get done legislatively to make sure that all the stakeholders are treated fairly and things like that. So, but very excited about the report. Again, a special thanks to our deputy registers out there who've struggled for the last 2 years. I know we've been working on this for 5 years since I've been in the legislature, going back to MNLARS, so this is a huge step. It's a very bipartisan issue that we should easily take care of this session. We've been waiting on this report to look at fees, so I think this is the year we got to get that done for our deputy registers. And I don't know how many different meetings I heard about how valuable our deputy registers are. We've heard it from DPS, we've heard it from DVS. These people are the people that are the front line, that are doing all these things, the interactions. So I think that's important. Excited about some of the kiosk things we're looking at to have things to make it easier for our citizens to get their tabs or their licenses done. So those are all great things and really looking forward to it. And just want to thank everybody in the House, in the Senate, and Rick King's team for getting this done, and look forward to making some of the changes looking forward. So thank you again.
Thank you, Senator Josinski. As I indicated, I have invited Chair Hornstein to appear today. He's unfortunately unable to make it, but he has Senator Representative Elkins to comment on behalf of the House. Representative Elkins, welcome to the Senate. Thank you.
Yeah, first of all, Representative Hornstein would like to be here, couldn't make it, so I'm happy to be filling in his place. But we'll start off by saying that I share Senator Newman's optimism that he and Chair Hornstein will be able to work out a good agreement on the number and placement of the exam stations. The two of them work famously well together, and so I'm highly confident that that will get done. Politicians like to talk in stories, so I'll tell you mine as an illustration of some of the stuff we're talking about this morning. So about 2 years ago, my wife and I went to the Bloomington Deputy Registrar office to get our real IDs. And everything was going swimmingly until we got to the part where my wife presented her Macy's bill as part of her identification process and was told that that wasn't going to be acceptable because she had already torn off the payment coupon and mailed it in. And in order to use that form of identification, the bill had to be intact. But the gal behind the counter at the Bloomington office helpfully said, "Don't worry about it. I can call over to the utility department. They'll send me a copy of your water bill, which will have both of your names and the address." So she did that. It came, faxed back. We were, all squared away, and were able to get our real IDs processed in one visit. But that was a very high-touch transaction. It took a lot of time for her to go out of her way to reach out to her counterpart in a different city department, get that information so that she was able to process our applications in one visit. So fast forward, those kinds of transactions are the transactions that we knew that would have to be done. They have to be done in person, and we knew that as we undertook the MNLARS replacement project successfully, and just everybody up here today was very actively involved in that successful implementation. But we understood that as a result of that project and Real ID and COVID, as Mr. King said, a disproportionate share of the complicated transactions that needed to be done in person would be done at those deputy registrars' offices. And so the cost of processing those transactions has gone way up to the point where, a year and a half ago, the city of Bloomington looked at the balance sheet for its DR's office and concluded we can't support this anymore because it's costing the property taxpayers of the city of Bloomington $350,000 in property taxes to subsidize this operation. And so that office that gave me such great service is now closed. Okay. We're in danger of that happening all over the state. I reached out to Hennepin County. They told me that, yeah, right now we're supporting our DVS offices to the tune of $2.5 to $3 million a year. Earlier this week, a colleague from Washington County reached out to me and reported that, yep, Washington County is reporting that they're having to subsidize their DVS operations to the tune of $500,000 to $1.5 million a year. It's been fluctuating because of COVID. But if we don't, do something to, provide greater financial assistance to these DR offices, we're going to be dropping. They're going to be dropping like flies. We're going to be losing more like we lost in Bloomington at a time when we need their capacity in order to get through the real ID crunch that is once again looming. So the current real ID deadline is now May. Every time there's a deadline, there's a flurry of last-minute people running to their local DVS office to try and get through the process. So if you guys are going to write stories about this, encourage people to go now instead of waiting until May. And also encourage them to take advantage of the facility that DVS has put up that allows you to scan and upload your proposed documentations in advance so that DVS can review them, judge whether their suitability, and let you know whether you're good to go or not, so that makes that stop at the registrar's office in person more of a formality that can be done very quickly. So I also want to thank the members of the panel, Mr. King, Ms. Wise, and the rest of their team. They did a really good job. It reflects the recommendations, actually reflect a proposal that Senator Josinski and I developed towards the end of the session last year. The two of us have worked very collaboratively on this issue, and I expect that we will continue to do so in this issue as well. So, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Elkins. We also have with us the minority lead in the Transportation Committee in the House who would like to say a few words. Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Mr. King, for putting this report together and your staff and for inviting us here. I think this report is monumental, more than we realize, and so I wanted to emphasize that. This report actually suggests that we change the philosophy and the culture of customer service in public entities and agencies to consider the impact of point of contact customer service. That's something that we generally don't do. If you remember any of your interactions with other agencies, it's usually about the red tape. It's usually about the regulations that they have to go through and trying to fulfill their requirements rather than helping the consumer who has to deal with this. What we found in other retail businesses and so forth is that the better you serve the customer, the more successful you're going to be. And so I think this is an example of how government needs to start understanding that we need to be responsive to the customer. In this case, it's the constituent, the taxpayer. And I hope that it will filter on through other agencies for how they can work together to actually make it easier for the customer, the taxpayer, in order to be impactful in how they provide their service. Because the service is about the individual as well. So I thank them for that, and I think this is a great opportunity for us to review that, and I think the report will give us great opportunity to debate and put things forward. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Representative, for those remarks. We're just about done. Are there any other questions from anyone that you would like to put to Mr. King? Yes.
On the user fee or the transaction fee, would that be passed along to the customers, or would that come from a state subsidy, or is the report neutral on that?
The fee the question is whether there's a taxpayer impact on the fee that we're talking about here. And what we're talking about is a filing fee. And today, with the recommendation of a higher filing fee on the driver's license, those would be seen by the customer. On the sharing of the online fees, those would not be an increase to the customer. The customer's already paying those. What we're recommending is a way for that to be allocated between both the deputy registrars and DVS to fulfill those online.
The other, do you have another question?
No, I'm recording you.
And kind of, could you go a little more into depth about the kind of the smart money aspect of shrinking the number of DVS stations? Is it a matter of those stations are currently sharing the same staff, and the staff has to travel? Is that what's going on?
The question is about sharing a little bit what's behind, let's say, the reasoning, maybe financially as part of it, but not all of it, of a reduced number of stations. I think Senator Newman said it very well. What we need is reliable number of hours and certain days of the week that stations around the state are open. So what we say in the report and other recommendations and in some of the commentary is that we want to have predictable hours at these stations. So however many stations there are, they're known by the community to be open on Monday afternoon only or whatever it happens to be. Now, typically, those satellite stations are staffed from hub stations. So in order to open a station for that afternoon, there will be 2 or 3 people leaving from one of the hubs to a satellite station, and they'll have the drive time. They'll do the work for the hours that they're open, then they'll have the drive time back. We'd obviously like to minimize that to some extent because it's inefficient if it's gone to an extreme, but it is actually the best way to serve the people in the number of days or hours that some of the satellites are open. So that's kind of the way that works, but what we need to rely on is let's just say we pick the number 50 out of our recommendation, the high end. So what are the hours for each of those 50? Especially those satellite ones, when are they open? And they're reliably open then, and we're always going to have staff going there. And then how do you get prepared for those exams so you don't have to retake them? And how do you, if you're doing a driver's license there, how do you do the pre-application so that all of that software or all your documents are loaded in the software? And then the fulfillment can happen one and done more than multiple times.
And also maybe clarifying the distinction between the exam stations and the deputy registrar offices. So as part of the recommendation as well, this reduction in number is related to the exam stations. The deputy registrars, the push there is to have more of those, which are a more significant number and throughout the state, but having more of them offer full service. And then also in the recommendation is allowing those deputy registrars to serve some of the transactions that are not exactly exam related that today may perhaps exclusively occur at the exam station. So kind of multiple things happening from that perspective.
Question.
So there was mention in the report of de-escalation training, the possibility of having that, about the exhaustion of people behaving badly. Is that expected to go on? I mean, does additional security and training staff on how to de-escalate, does that need to be part of the ongoing way of dealing with this?
The question is around de-escalation training and the types of recommendations we made and whether that needs to be ongoing and so forth, and maybe even wider than the agency that we're recommending it for. I think the answer broadly would be yes, if the same conditions apply. So we have remote locations, we have people who are with public members one-on-one in those remote locations, and we want to be able to have a secure environment for both the public, the customer, as well as the employees. And I think it's pretty simple these days to have, it's expensive, costs money to have CCTV and have that kind of coverage at the locations where you have those kind of activities going on. So we would definitely recommend it for that. And then I think some de-escalation training that goes along with that, and I think the department has done some of that, but we believe that there's an increased requirement for that, just given the environment of the day, that it's more important that people at the counter realize that, maybe somebody coming there while they're not intent on some kind of violent action, that maybe dealing with them in the de-escalation manner might take the wind out of the sail a little bit. So that's what we're hoping for. In general, I think across the world of dealing with customers, we see more and more video going on. We see more and more de-escalation training, whether people are on the phone or in person. So I would advocate it for everybody to evaluate that interacts with customers.
Any other questions?
Just a quick background question. When we talk about the deputy registrars, does that include both the mom and pop shops and the municipal, the ones run by municipalities?
The question is, when we talk about the deputy registrars, what's the definition under that mean? What is it? And it includes the public, which often are county or municipal. It includes the privates, which are usually private businesses. And it includes the Department of Vehicle Services itself, who has some people that do that actual work. So when we talk about them, we mean all of them. And in the report, we also use the term deputy registrar to include the people that not only do the vehicle transactions, but the actual name for the people that do the driver's license transactions is DLA, or driver's license agent. So when we talk deputy registrar, we mean all of that, in private, public, licenses, registration.
Would anyone mind just touching on, there are some recommendations in this report that have been discussed at length at the legislature and can have a partisan split. I'm thinking of like the Class D road tests, third-party road tests for that. Can you all address that and just talk about, like, do you expect to find common ground on some of those things that has not happened in the past?
Maybe I can say, I'll talk about the report. The question is maybe moreover about what did we consider as an independent review team, whether a recommendation had been made prior by a party or another party, or a body or another body, or the governor or not the governor. And honestly, we didn't care. That's why we're independent. What we thought about was what would make this ecosystem better for customers. And we know that in the discussions between the two committees and the two bodies, there'll be a lot of talk back and forth and compromises made, and they'll come to the best decisions that can be made for the time. And we believe that our job was to tee all the things up that we see, and then let them do the good work that they do.
The only thing that I would add to your question is we are acutely aware of the issues surrounding, the various testing and so forth, different classifications of licenses. There will be an ongoing discussion in the legislature on that issue. We also have to discuss with DPS on those issues. And the best I can tell you is that we will do the very best that we can to come to a resolution, at least in my mind, that is in the best interest of the people of the state of Minnesota. That's the best answer I can give you at this point. Any other questions? It's kind of a long press conference, but a fun one. Any other questions from anyone? With that, I want to thank those who are here in person. Thank you for coming. Those online that are listening to the live broadcast, we appreciate you joining in. And again, to Mr. King and his team, you have put together a report that, as you can see, has bipartisan interest and bipartisan support. And that would be true in both, I believe, the Senate and the House. And so I am looking forward to working with this report. And I have no doubt that there will be legislation coming forward where we are using as our basis for our legislation the report that Mr. King and his team have put together. So once again, Mr. King, thank you for your work, and Ms. Weiss and the other two members of your team, you really have done a good service for the people of Minnesota. Thank you for coming.